Hello, everybody. Today we are going to do an adding and subtracting integers review before we take a quiz. Okay, so adding integers is what we're going to start off with. And something we want to talk about is how can we relate it to something we already know? Okay, so adding integers is like having and owing money. Okay, so having money, right? A positive integer is like having money. So if you have a positive number in one of our problems here, it's like you have that money. And a negative integer is like owing money to someone. Okay, so usually when you are asked to do problems like this, right, it'll say find the sum. Sum means that it is going to have an addition sign in the middle. So if you look at all of our examples here, right, these all have addition signs in the middle, but adding is not actually what we always do. All right, sometimes we add, and actually sometimes we subtract, depending on if we have positives and negatives together or not. Okay, so let's talk about it just in a real world sense. In the first one, right, you have a positive 2 plus a positive 7. It's like you have $2 in your left pocket and you have $7 in your right pocket, right? So you have all of that money. So all you're doing is adding that together. So positive 2 plus positive 7 is going to give you positive 9. You have all of that money, so that is a positive answer. Now, the difference is, right, negatives, if you have two negative numbers, it's like you owe Miss Patma $3. That's negative. You owe her $3. And you owe Mrs. Richards $6, right? So you actually owe a total of $9. But since you owe it, it's negative, right? You owe $9. So here we added, right? And we got a positive number out since they were both positive. Here we also added, but we got a negative answer because both of them were negative. Okay, let's look at the next situation, and maybe I should zoom this in a little bit. That's a little better. Okay, now in this situation, right, you have a negative 9. So it's like you owe Mrs. Patma $9. The positive 4 means you have $4 though. So you owe Mrs. Patma $9. You have $4, and let's assume you give it to her, right? So if you give her the $4, do you still owe her money? Right? You do. You didn't pay off your whole debt. So you're actually subtracting here, right? So 9 minus 4 gives us 5, right? And so, but you don't have $5 now. You still owe Mrs. Patma $5. So in this case, you subtract. All right, again, let's try again. So in this case, the positive 8, you have $8 and you owe Mrs. Patma one of those dollars, right? So if you have $8, you owe her one, you pay that to her. You actually now have $7 and you have that money. You don't owe Mrs. Patma anymore. Since you have that money, that's positive. So you subtract it. All right, so what is the pattern here, right? The pattern in this case, if you have numbers that have the same sign, right? You have a positive and a positive or a negative and a negative, then you add. So this is the rule, we call it. All right? Rule number 1 here is same sign, you add. Okay? Rule number 2, in adding integers, this is when we have the addition sign in there. If we had opposite signs, right, one positive and one negative, doesn't matter the order, then we subtract. So opposite signs, we subtract. And we can always use the idea of money when we're adding integers if we are confused, because sometimes it is hard to think of it as just rules. We want to think of it in the real world. Okay, you try. All right, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to try that. Not a couple minutes, probably a couple seconds to get the answer and see if you can get it correct. -6 plus -2. What should we do? Okay, hopefully you notice that -6, you owe Miss Patma $6, plus -2, you owe Mrs. Richards $2. And so if you owe Miss Patma 6 and you owe Mrs. Richards 2, then you owe a total of $8. And since you owe it, it's negative. All right. And so something to just to double check up here, right? You look at your example, a negative and a negative, you added those, and then you got a negative answer. The rule was those are the same sign, a negative and a negative, and we add. And so that was the answer. Hopefully you got that correct, because that will be on the upcoming quiz. Okay, next, this is where we get a little more challenging. So subtracting integers is much more challenging or difficult. We'll call it challenging. Okay, so we start, instead of keeping the subtraction sign, we start by changing subtraction problems to addition problems. And we do that so that we don't have to memorize more rules and memorize more things. Okay, so these are really the rules that we need to know. We can change subtraction problems to addition problems and use the money idea again. All right, the way we do this part, this is how we do this. You circle the last number in the problem. Then you add a line to make the minus a plus. Then you change the sign of the last number, the one that you circled. And then you get to use the addition rules. Now, that's all just words until I show you an example, okay? So, for example, when you look at this, first of all, it'll say find the difference, usually. Difference means subtraction, all right? But again, it doesn't mean we're always going to subtract necessarily. So we're going to use our rules here. So step one, you got to look in the middle. If there's a subtraction sign in the middle, you want to circle the last number in the problem. All right, I circled it. Then you want to add a line to make the minus a plus. So we're going to add a line to make that minus a plus. Then change the sign of that last number, the one that you circled, okay? So this is an 8 right now. We're going to make it a -8, and maybe I can use a different color so it stands out. You want to put a negative sign in there. I don't know, you can't really see that. I'm going to write this better. So I'm going to write this bigger. So it should say now 2 plus, and then in the circled symbol, -8 equals. All right, the reason you do that is because now this is like our same rules. You have $2. You owe Miss Fatma $8. How much do you have or owe? Well, if you have 2 and you owe 8, you give Miss Fatma the 2. Now you only owe $6, and because you owe it, it's negative. This is the answer to that. All right. And if you check the rules, right, you have a positive and a negative here, right? You have opposite signs. All right. So opposite signs means you subtract. Is that what we did here? Certainly, we did 8 minus 2 and got 6, but we had more negatives than positives, so it's a -6. All right, let's try it again. Let's zoom this in a little bit. Hopefully this focus is better. Okay, I'm going to use a different color to keep it separate. Let's do this. All right. Circle the last number in the problem. That's a 3. Okay. Add a line. So we're going to add a line to the minus sign. And then we're going to change the sign inside that circle. So there's no sign in there, so we have to put a negative. Again, I'm going to write it bigger because it's hard to see. So this now should say -3 plus, and then inside the circle now we have a -3. So this means you owe $3 to Miss Fatma. You owe $3 more to your mom. And so do you have any money or do you owe it? You actually owe $6, and owing money is negative. Again, so you check that though up here, right? You have the same sign. That was our rule up here. Same sign, you add. And that's what we did. We added 3 and 3 and got 6, but both of those are negative, and so we keep it negative. All right, let's do it again. Look in the middle. You have a minus sign, right? So first move is going to be to circle the last number. So sometimes it's in parentheses, and that's okay. So that's a -8 in there. All right, you circle it. Now we're going to add a line to the minus sign and change the sign. This one is a little bit clearer, so I don't have to rewrite it. So add a line and change the sign. Now what you really have is 5 plus +8. So these are both positive. That means you have $5 and you have another $8, right? So together you're going to add those up. 5 plus 8 is going to give you how much? 13. And since you have 5 and you have 8, that's a +13. And that's our answer. So again, check with your rules up here, right? You had the same sign, positive and a positive, once we changed it over, and so we added. All right, last one. Again, there's a minus sign in the middle. So what we want to do is we want to circle that last number. In this case, it's a -4. We're going to add a line and change the sign. Add a line and change the sign. So now you have a -6 and a +4. So that's like you owe Miss Fatma $6. You have 4, so you give her the 4. Do you still owe her money or not? Yes, you still owe her money. How much do you owe? You owe $2, and owing to is negative. Again, if you want to double check that, right? Now you have a negative and a positive. Those are opposite signs, right? Opposite signs, we subtract, and that's what we did here. Okay, you try it now. You try -4 minus 8. See if you can get it without help. Okay, let's check and see if you did it correct. So you look in the middle. If you have a minus sign in the middle, you got to use our method. So we start by circling that last number. Then we add a line and change the sign. So I'm going to rewrite this. A lot of times there's not enough space. So we really have -4 plus -8 equals. Okay, negative, does that mean we have or owe? Negative means we owe. So we owe Miss Fatma $4. We owe your grandma $8. So how much do we owe in total? We have to add those up. 4 plus 8 is 12. And do we have 12 or do we owe it? We owe 12. And so this is our final answer. Hopefully you got it correct. Okay, now to practice, if you turn the page over, okay, turn it to the back, there's a couple practice problems. There's actually 12 of them on there. And what we want to do is practice before you take the quiz. So without help, You want to practice these and see if you can get them correct. I will start you on a couple of them, okay? So number 1 is easy. I'm not going to start you on that one. Let's start with number 2 as an example. So number 2, take a look. First move you make is look in the middle of the problem. You have a subtraction sign in the middle. Do we want subtraction? No. And so we use our method. If we have a subtraction, we circle that last number. And it kind of rhymes. So we add a line to the minus sign and change the sign of the last number. Add a line, change the sign. So now what we really have, and sometimes it helps to rewrite it, we really have -6 plus +17, right? And so you have a negative and a positive. Negative means you owe $6. You have 17. So what do we do here? Do we add or do we subtract, right? And so if you need to, you can look back at your notes. But if you owe Miss Patma $6 and you have 17, you give her the 6. You're really subtracting here. So 17 minus 6. Let's see what that is. 7 minus 6 is 1. 1 minus nothing is 1. So $11, right? So do you owe $11 or do you have $11 now? You have $11, so it's positive 11. If you had owed $11, it would be negative. Okay, let's try again. Let's do one more together. Let's look down at number 4 now. All right, so if you look in the middle of number 4, there's already a plus sign. So we don't have to do any of the circling. We don't have to add a line and change the sign. If it's already a plus sign, you can start with the money idea. So we owe Miss Fatma $13. We have 20. So let's think. If we pay Miss Fatma the 13, how much do we have left? So that means we're subtracting. 20 minus 13 gives us how much? 10 minus 3 is 7, right? And so we're left with 7. And do we owe 7 still, or would we have 7? We would have 7 left. We have more positives than negatives, so this is our answer. Okay, do the rest of the 12, check with Miss Patma or Mrs. Richards, and see if they are correct. And then once you can get them correct or practice them, then we will give you the short quiz. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.